So today we are in Daniel again. So this is the third week that we're in the last vision. So chapters 10, 11, and 12 are the last vision of the book of Daniel. And so today we're going to be doing basically chapter 11, which is the heart of the message that the messenger brought, right? So in 10 we've been looking at Daniel, at the situation that he was in, and then the fact that the messenger came, probably multiple messengers. We have some stuff. Last week that we were asked if, is this person standing in linen, is this Jesus? Very well could be. Like, this could be a vision of Jesus from the Old Testament. That there are many people who think that. But all this stuff in 10, this whole vision and this whole thing that knocked Daniel down on his knees and made him so fearful and so terrified, all of this was to bring him this message. And so the message that we're going to talk about today is this whole vision came about so that Daniel would hear this message, this news. Remember that we talked about Daniel. He was praying for understanding about what's going on in his context, and he's praying to humble himself to be able to hear what God says. Last week we talked about the difference between chapter 9, the vision in chapter 9, where this is earlier on, and Israel hadn't gone to, he had read in Jeremiah about the 70 years, and he was praying for the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, that they would confess their sins and be different and be able to return to the land. In 10, last week, I talked about how this probably was after that first group went, and then we read in Ezra that they were stopped from rebuilding the temple, and this mourning that Daniel is going through may actually be a result of him hearing that the temple, they had to stop building the temple because people stopped them with the sword from doing that, and it caused him to, what's happening? Why is this happening the way it is? And now we get to this text that we're in now. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. I'm actually going to start at 10:20, and then I'm going to just read all the way through chapter 11. Then he said, this is the messenger, "Do you understand why I came to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia, then a 4th will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong, through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. And a mighty king will arise, and he will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. But as soon as he arises, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants, nor according to his authority, which he wielded. For his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to others besides them. Then the king of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His dominion will be a great dominion indeed. After some years they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. But she will not retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up, along with those who brought her in, and the ones who sired her as well, and he who supported her in those times. But one of the descendants of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and display great strength. Also, their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold he will take into captivity in Egypt, and he, on his part, will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. Then the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south, but he will return to his own land. His sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he may again wage war up to this very fortress. The king of the south will be enraged and will go forth and fight with the king of the north. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given into the hand of the former. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. For the king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than the former, and after an interval of some years he will press on with a great army and much equipment. Now in those times many will rise up against the king of the south, and violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege ramp, and capture a well-fortified city. And the forces of the south will not stand their ground, nor even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. But he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withstand him. He will also stay for a time in the beautiful land, with destruction in his hand. He will set his face to come with power of his whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it. But she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. Then he will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many, but a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. Moreover, he will repay him with his scorn. So he will turn his face toward the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall and be found no more. Then in his place will arise one who will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom, yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle. In his place a despicable person will arise, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. The overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant. After an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception, and he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. In a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest parts of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them, and he will devise his schemes against the strongholds, but only for a time. He will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army. So the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army of war, but he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overthrow, but many will fall down slain. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table, but it will not succeed, for the time is still to come at the appointed time. Then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, and he will take action and then return to his own land. At the appointed time, he will return and come into the south, but this last time it will not turn out the way it did before. For ships of Kittim will come against him, Therefore he will be disheartened, and he will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up an abomination of desolation. By smooth words he will turn to the godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. Now, when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join them in hypocrisy. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and he will speak monstrous things against the God of gods, and he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all. But instead he will honor a god of fortresses, a god whom his father did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. He will take action against the strongest of the fortresses with the help of the foreign god, and he will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and will cause them to rule over the many, and will parcel out the land for a price. At the end time, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships, and he will enter countries, overflow them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. Then he will stretch out his hand against the other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and Ephesians will follow at his heels. But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful high mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. All right. That was long, I understand. So I probably should have given you a couple things to listen for before that, but now that I'm thinking about it, it's too late. I'm not going to read it again. All right. What we have here is a history of the things that are going to happen after Daniel. So remember, Daniel has been mourning because the people of Israel, there's a remnant that has returned. They have an altar, but they haven't been able to build the temple. And he's like, what, why? What's going on? And in both this vision and in the vision of chapter 9, God says, I have a plan for my people. They will return. But in both of these, it's very clear that this is not the end of trouble for Israel. This is not Israel returning back to the land and it just being like, we're done. Everything's happy. They're never going to be taken over again. And we have that here. So one of the things I wanted to highlight here, just at the beginning, why this is all very detailed. There's so many details in here. And there's a lot of people that currently think that this was written after the fact. There's so many details that this had to have been written after the fact. But I don't believe that. I believe this was written before the fact. This is as history written in advance. This is history written in advance. And then now we look back at it from history and we say, yeah, it lines up pretty good. It lines up very well, actually. It lines up particularly well. Why would God give this to Daniel? Why would this be what God gives to Daniel early on? So just to give you a sense of time frame we're talking about here, Daniel is probably having this prayer around 530s BC. Remember BC, so we're counting backwards. So 530s, and the what goes on here in 530 is Persia. Persia and the Medes take over. So from 530 to about 323. So that's when Alexander the Great did his thing, was 330, 323. So that's about 200 years, about a little less than 200 years. So that's 200 years. So Daniel, no one who read this when Daniel wrote it down is going to actually experience even what happens in verse 4. We'll get there, because that was 200 years later. And then we have another 150 years to 150 BC, which is when we see what's going on in the latter bit of the chapter here, which I have said before is Antiochus, and that stuff going on then. So we have roughly, 300 and, I can't add, sorry, 400 years, something like 400 years before all of this is done. So this is not being given to Daniel so that he knows what happens tomorrow. Like, this is not giving Daniel a map of what's happening. This has to be given to Daniel for some other reason than to give him a map. I'm not saying it's not history written down beforehand. I'm saying that's not why he would give it to him. Why would God give this to Daniel? And it's because God is telling Daniel there's a lot going to happen. Not only is it beyond your control, but it's going to be after you're gone or after you're asleep, right? You're going to die, and then this stuff is still going to be going on. Who's in control? God's in control. I can write this down. And we see in this chapter 11, we see this balance of God being sovereign and people doing what they want. Freedom. Let me highlight that. So in verse 3, so just right off the bat, a mighty king, it's talking about Alexander the Great, will arise, and he will rule with a great authority, and it says he will do as he pleases. So it's saying Alexander's going to do what he wants to do. He is free to do what he wants to do, and he will do what he wants to do. But then the very next phrase says, but as soon as he arises, his kingdom will be broken up. It's like, yes, but, all right? And then let's go on. So down in verse 16, we have something very similar. So now we're talking about Antiochus III. So this is going down a ways, but it says, but he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withhold him. So again, we have this picture of this king, Antiochus III, and he is able to do as he pleases. He has the strength. He can do what he wants. He is free to do what he wants. And yet at the same time, in verse 16, it says, he will stay for a time, right? There is this sense that there is freedom and a time, right? And we see that again in, where's the last one? The last one is in 36. Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself for every god. And this one, we don't even get out of the same verse. It says, for that which is decreed will be done, right? So we have this balance of God is sovereign, and people are free to do what they want to do. And frustratingly, Daniel, the messenger, and actually this whole book of Daniel, seems to be okay with that. It doesn't explain how that can be. It just says it is. That's the way it is. Their people are free, and God decrees. God decides. God is sovereign. Both are true, and they don't try to sort it out for us. And so there's no way I'm even going to attempt to come up with it. If Daniel's not, if this messenger isn't going to try and explain it, I'm not going to try and explain it. Just know it's true. This is what it says. In fact, there's 3 times when it says he does as he pleases, and then there's 3 times that are not exactly connected. But in 27, 29, and 35, there's this other phrase, and it says, 27 it says, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. 29 says, at the appointed time he will return. 35, at the end of 35 says, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Okay, appointed time is being very exact in terms of what the messenger and what Daniel is saying is there is a time set in the future by God, and it's appointed that at that time something's going to happen. All this stuff is going to happen. People are going to be free to do what they want, but at that time, it's going to happen, right? There is no doubt. It is appointed. It will happen. It was decreed. It will happen. So we have this picture, and throughout this whole chapter, we have evil going on. We have backfighting. We have all sorts of stuff going on. But at the appointed time, God will do what he says he's going to do. We can take that to the bank, if you will, right? Okay. Just that is like overarching what's going on. The second, so remember, Daniel is praying for understanding and humility. So that answers both, right? There is a real humility that's required to say, yeah, God's going to do what he's going to do when he decides to do it. And it's already decided. And there's also an understanding that gives Daniel this understanding that there's going to be all this stuff, but God is in control. God is sovereign. That's what we need to understand. What do we need to understand? Do we need to understand the ways and the ways things are moving and traveling? No, we don't. We need to know, we need to understand that God is sovereign. He has appointed times. And in the past, what we see here is we see that he's appointed times previously, and they've happened, right? So this is a track record of God appointing times and then having them happen. So it would be one thing if we read this and this was all in the future, all these appointed times were in the future, and we just had to take him at his word. I mean, we should, but like we wouldn't see evidence that he appoints times and then they happen. If we didn't have any evidence of that, it would be even harder for us to take it on faith. But what we have here is we have this picture of chaos going on in the world. God has appointed times, and then when those times came, what he said was going to happen, happened. So we have evidence that this happens. So when God promises something and says this will happen, we can look back at this and say, yeah, he has a track record of doing that. We can do this. Okay. So let's, I'm already out of time. All right, but let me take some big pass. Let's take a pass at this, and we want to do big picture stuff here. I'll try not to get off into the history, which I really enjoy, but we don't have time for. So first, verses 1, back in 20, we have again from last week, we have this indication that the messenger is going to go back against the prince of Persia. So there's a prince of Persia, there's a prince of Greece. So those are in the heavens. Those are things in the heavens. There are things. And then Michael is named as your prince, the prince, the heavenly prince for Israel, for the people. So we are in 11 going into very clearly these earthly things have happened, but it's introduced by saying there's stuff going on that you don't see that's causing this to happen. All right, so 1 to 4. Well, 1, I want to just highlight that this is the messenger, and he's saying, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I, the messenger, arose to be an encouragement and protection for him. Who's Darius? Is Darius a Jew? Is he a Hebrew? No. He is a king of Persia. He is someone who is a pagan. He worships another god, and yet this messenger says, I went to be an encouragement and a protection for him. So just off the bat, we see that God is free to do what he wants to do. Just off the bat, he's free to do what he wants to do. 2 to 4, this messenger then pretty much just kind of like dismissively says, the next 200 years, this is what's going to happen. There's going to be a few kings of Persia. There's going to be a big king of Persia. There's going to be a king of Greece. He's going to be gone. Like, just kind of dismissively says, next 200 years, this is what's going to happen. Doesn't matter, right? Well, it does matter, but is this going to say, this is going to happen? And I need to mention it, but, whatever. I mean, let's think about the things that are in here. This is the last of these Persian kings is Artaxerxes, right? And before him is Xerxes. And we have the story of Esther that comes from that time period. And this guy is in control of the world. He does as he pleases. He is nobody questions him. Well, until Alexander the Great questions him. But then here's Alexander the Great, right? And he's just he comes, he does his thing, he dies, right? He doesn't even have kids to pass his kingdom on to. That's not exactly true. He did have kings, he passed them on to them, and he got murdered, right? He had no control over that. Alexander the Great could not set his people, his family up to carry on the kingdom. Even Alexander the Great could not do this. So we have this picture in 2 to 4 of just, here's what's happening. Yeah, okay. Then we get to this series of histories. So from 5 to 20, we have this kind of machinations of historical intrigue. We have a daughter being sent for. Okay, so these are the Seleucids in the north. The king of the north is the Seleucids. They're kind of based in what's Asia Minor, Antioch. That's why his name Antiochus is because he's from Antioch. All right, so he's from up there, and then in the south we have Egypt. The king of the south is Egypt. It's the Ptolemies, the Ptolemaic reign. These guys, I mean, we see that they kind of come and go, but they're around past Rome, like Cleopatra was a Ptolemaic, was somebody of this line, right? Okay, so these guys are doing their thing. The king of the south tries to do. Oh, the other thing to notice is that these kingdoms started with buddies. These kingdoms were all started by, well, buddies might be the wrong spot. They were all generals of Alexander. So nominally they were buddies. But, as things are at the top, they probably didn't like each other, and that carries on for hundreds of years, okay? They start by, we're going to do some diplomacy. We're going to send my daughter up there, and you're going to get married, and we're going to be okay. Well, the daughter gets sent up there, and then she gets murdered. Okay, so I mean, we have all this stuff that we think of when we think of like power, corruption, and stuff like that happens, and then after that happens, there's actually a battle and wars and all sorts of stuff, and you'll see peppered through here. I'm actually just gonna. We see peppered through here that all this stuff is going on, and the messenger is talking to Daniel, remember? And he's talking to Daniel about what happens to Israel. And so he kind of peppers in here what happens to Israel throughout this. So there's these massive powers going on either side. Oh, and, where is it? The north. And then he says in 14, now in those many will rise up against the king, violent ones among your people, right? Every once in a while, it just pops up that this happens, or he goes into the beautiful land, which we assume to be Israel, right? So in 16, he spent for a time in the beautiful land, but he had destruction in his hand when he was there. So we see throughout this that the messenger is making it clear that there are powers, titanic powers, if you will, going on around Israel, kind of crossing across and taking their thing. But in the same time, the messenger is saying, but you remain the beautiful land. You remain my people. You remain the people who have Michael as your prince in heaven, right? That remains. This passes through. I just wanted to. Sorry, I'm not going to cover as much of this as I probably should. But I've covered a lot of it before. So Antiochus III is before Antiochus IV, who I've talked about before. And he comes and he does a bunch of stuff. And in 1617, it says that, he did as he pleases, and no one was able to withstand him. And he spent for a time in a beautiful land. He will set his face to come to power in the whole kingdom, bringing to him a proposal of peace. Like he's doing all this stuff. And eventually we end up with, and that's it. His time was over. And then in 20, we get this new guy who comes in. And this is Antiochus IV. And he wasn't like the son or anything. He shouldn't have been king, but he made himself king by intrigue, right? So he kind of weasels his way in, if you will. But then we see that even part of that is that the Prince of Covenant. So the Prince of Covenant probably is, Israel. Anyway, I want to go back. Let's back up 30 to 35. I just want to look at this again. So in the midst of his doing stuff, there's this picture of the Holy Land and the Holy Covenant. And in 30, he says, and will return and become enraged. So he goes down to the south and he gets beat, and he comes back and he's enraged at the Holy Covenant. And he takes an action against them. So he will show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. So here in 30 to 35, we get this picture of the people living in Israel. And there's actually two factions in that group of Israel. We have those who forsake the Holy Covenant, and we have those who do not forsake the Holy Covenant. The ones who forsake the Holy Covenant get the favor of the king. The ones who don't forsake the Holy Covenant, they die. They don't get the king, and they die. He used by smooth words, he will turn to the godless. So, and this king is turning people who were holding to the Holy Covenant, and by words, smooth words, he will turn them from the covenant into godlessness. This is going on, and then those people actually kill each other. The ones who give up on the covenant kill the ones who hold to the covenant. There's this picture of internal strife, and this is very critical to the messenger and to Daniel, because these are people who are listening to the voices around them. Some are standing, like Daniel, and not giving up on the covenant, and others are not. And they are giving up on the covenant, and they are the ones persecuting the ones who hold to the covenant. So I want to just highlight here, this is my point for this whole thing. There's all this titanic upheaval, political stuff, wars going on, all this stuff is going on around them, and there are people who believe that God is sovereign, and there are people who believe that he is not sovereign. And both are at odds with each other. You have the choice of believing that God is sovereign and all this stuff doesn't matter, and God's holy covenant matters more than everything we see, including and beyond the point of maybe dying to believe that. And those who don't believe that, who think that the world around them has the power to affect God's covenant, and they also fall, but they have the honor, privilege of being with the kings of the time. I want to be someone who believes what the messenger is telling me. I want to understand what the messenger is telling me, that all of this stuff going on, that's overwhelming. It's even overwhelming just to read it, right? I read this whole thing and you're probably like, blah, blah, what, by the time you get to the end, you're just like, what's going on? This is so much. Well, I think that's intentional. I think that the messenger could have told this whole story like he did in verses 2 to 4. Yeah, it happened. But he didn't. He overwhelmed Daniel with all of this detail. He overwhelmed him with this detail because he was saying, it will be overwhelming, all the stuff that's going on around you. But what is important is that you hold to the covenant. What is important is that you hold to the covenant and you believe that the covenant comes from a God who, in the midst of all of this, is able to say, right here, this is going to happen. Even in the midst of all of this going on. That is the God who gives us a covenant. And we need to hold on to that God. We need to hold on to that covenant. And holding on to that covenant does not mean that we will be safe. Holding on to that covenant does not mean that we will not be persecuted. Holding on to that God and that covenant does not mean we won't be killed. But it does mean that we will stay with the God who appoints the times in history. And that is of so much more importance than being right with people who we don't even know their names. We can argue about who the names of these kings are. We can argue about who are the 4 Persians. We can argue about that because we don't actually know. But we can know there is one in this story who is known, and that is God. We know which God is appointing the times. There is no question about that. We can hold on to that God who we know. That's our call. There's all this stuff going on around us. I'm not going to get into the details, but in the United States, in the world, stuff's going on. We have to hold on to God. We have to hold on to God. Smooth words, appeasing words, against words, those don't matter. What matters is, what has God appointed? I am going to hold on to that. That's it. I don't know how to do that. I don't really know how to do that except for the example of Daniel. When I see things going on for the Christians, for my church, for my people that make me mourn, I mourn. When I see things that I need to understand, I don't go to the world to ask for understanding. I go to God for understanding. All of this is a model that I can follow. I can hold on to this. I go to God for understanding. I mourn when I see what is obviously evil. But I know that God appoints the time in the future. And just because we're in the New Testament, that's the second coming of Christ. The second coming of Christ seems like it's being delayed. But God has appointed the time that Christ will come again. That there is an appointed time for that. It just hasn't come yet. But it's still appointed. We can bank on that. We can count on that. We can mourn when we see it seeming like it's further away. We can ask for understanding when it just doesn't make sense. But we ask God, and we mourn to God, because he is the one who made that appointed time. That's all I got. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, this chapter is overwhelming in the same way that what we see around us is overwhelming. There's all these things going on that we just can't put our fingers on. We can't actually know. But what we can know is that you are sovereign. And what we can know is that your messenger didn't see a problem with there being chaos and freedom and people doing as they pleased and you appointing times. That seems to be just true. And so we can hold on to that. Your appointed time is coming. Lord, help us to mourn for the places where we see our friends fall, and yet we want to hold to you. We want to hold to the covenant that you've made with us, that you sent your Son. Your Son died for us so that we could live. That we want to hold on to and trust you to do the rest in these overwhelming times. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.